From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Ahead for you today, K-State's Dan O'Brien discussing this remarkable bullish run in the wheat market and the opportunity for you growers to lock in prices on 2022 crop. Dan will also comment on the strength of corn and soybean prices relative to wheat, as one formula would depict that. Then, K-State's Sarah Sexton-Bowser and Terry Felderhoff will provide an update on the Drop XL Sorghum technology project here at K-State. It's seeking out sorghum traits that lead to lower plant transpiration and therefore less water use while potentially improving yields. And awaiting to talk Kansas agricultural weather with us, K-State's Chip Redmond. All that's next on this Agriculture Today. Welcome once again to Agriculture Today. Well, the wheat market is on a roll, and that's how we'll open up our grain market segment for this week now, as we're in touch with Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. He is stationed in his office, Colby, Northwest Kansas. Great lot of momentum behind wheat prices right now, Dan, and we keep coming back to short supplies worldwide. Is that still the catalyst at work here?
Yes, that and the quality. I understand there are great concerns about the quality of the Australian wheat crop. They have quantity, but with excessive rains that have come, it hasn't helped them in terms of exportable food wheat. We have a good amount of feed wheat around, and I think the residual carryover impact of all the dryness that happened up in Canada, at northern states in the U.S. for hard red spring, but also white wheat, which is an increasing proportion of what we export. And frankly, that's what a good amount of what Australia deals with, too. It's sure affected the markets here. We notice, of course, in Kansas, close of 828 for Deese hard red winter wheat yesterday. On the same day, the close for hard red spring wheat on the Minneapolis exchange was at about 1046, over $2 higher. So dry conditions up to the north. You do wonder if wheat prices, spring wheat prices being as they are, if you'll pull more spring wheat acres in at the expense of maybe soybeans, as there's just a lot of anticipation as we stand right now of the South American crop getting in pretty good shape with a lot of challenges in terms of getting nitrogen fertilizer, other types, and phosphorus for the feed grains that will see acres be forced to shift over into soybeans, and that world supplies, well, in all these countries tend to follow that given the fertilizer shortages. So a lot of kind of hidden pessimism, I guess, in terms of where soybeans are going. And you can see it in some of the most basic of technical analysis tools that we watch. You look at the soybean relative strength index, looking at continuous soybean futures. We're at about 40 on a scale of 100. If you're at 50, you're sideways. You're pretty much neutral. While we're at 40 for soybeans. Conversely, if you look at what the relative strength index is for continuous Chicago wheat futures, it's at 66. So completely on the opposite side of optimism versus pessimism for the wheat markets. And again, we're not dyed-in-the-wool chartists here, but the trend for wheat doesn't seem to be abating at all. It had jumped up to about 750 at the end of July, had come down some with harvests and what other factors affecting the market. But here since basically October 1, you've got a market that although it's had some ups and downs, still closed yesterday, 828. It was at 775, but just a few days ago. So strong market. I would add in also for corn, that same relative strength index for the continuous corn futures contract is about 53, so just a little bit positive. So clearly, as you pointed out, the strength in all this right now is in the wheat market. Corn, moderate to slightly positive, and soybeans really, really suffering in terms of the strength and momentum in the market.
Before we speak further about corn and beans, with the wheat market so solid, to say the least right now, producers may be contemplating, if they haven't priced a certain amount of expected 2022 production already, thinking in those terms, Dan. It's always that question, when to pull the trigger, but there are opportunities being expressed in the market.
In Kansas, as you know, we try to follow, Eric, some key elevator locations. A lot of them tend to be terminals in major parts of the state. So we're getting to the very top of the prices or trying to follow those. Kansas wheat spot prices right now, interesting, at Salina, Topeka, Hutchinson, top bids, all 822 on the dot, all 822. Then in Colby, 798 is the top. Garden City, 808. Columbus down southeast, 777. So really all strong, but interesting how in those export terminal-oriented locations of Salina, Topeka, and Hutchinson that they're in lockstep on the top bids. But the new crop bids, which is what you're asking about, for next July, basically, Colby 774, Salina 775, Topeka 794, Garden City 774 again, 780 in Hutchinson, 774 in Columbus. Just tremendous prices historically. If our frame of reference is where we've been the last several years, these are unheard of. Well, they're not unheard of, but they only come in the most challenging of supply-demand times. I was talking today with some people that I counsel with on the markets, and yes, these forward pricing opportunities are out there. We've tended in Kansas to be pretty hesitant to be forward pricing, particularly of wheat, just because of all the time that we're going through. We do have that 708 hard red winter wheat crop insurance price to work with. And if anything, people have probably bought up their APHs up to, if they were at 70, maybe they're 75, or if they're 75, maybe they're going to 80 or 85. It costs more money to do that, but you're buying revenue coverage on the bottom end. That and even discussions of supplementing that with SCO insurance, all manner of things being looked at to try to come in underneath these high prices and gain some protection. So our reticence to take on the yield risk inherent in delivery on forward contracts is a real issue. I think just because of all this time we've got to get to June and all that can happen with wheat, whereas we get really aggressive at 40 and 50% maybe of our expected production for corn or grain sorghum or even soybeans, our natural reticence and the experience of Kansas weather and extremes affecting the wheat crop, do 10, 15%.
Couple of points here on corn and beans, respectively. The corn market, as you suggested, seeking direction in a certain respect, but you note that corn basis in Kansas is, in fact, improving at the moment.
Well, the actual cash prices, driven by where futures are at, again, D's corn closing at 569.5 yesterday, and cash prices, particularly, again, comparing to what I had for records 2 weeks ago, we've seen pretty strong positive improvement and in most of these basis levels. Spot cash corn running 587 in Northwest, 584 tops in Salina, in Topeka 571, 604 in Garden City, 604 in Hutchinson, 550 in Columbus, all the way through. Other than that Columbus bid, those are all positive cash basis bids. So pretty strong cash markets. So we showed the futures as just slightly positive for their RSI for corn, but the cash bids and at the local level, with a lot of users seeking to get hold of what they can, no doubt is doing pretty well. It's interesting, forward contract bids, really the highest forward contract bid for 2022 fall is 10 over at Garden City at 556. Everything else is running about 25 to 40 under across the state. Still, those are great prices. And I know my colleague and I, Greg Eibendahl, have been looking at cost of production numbers, and we're trying to keep up to have those represent what's been happening in particularly fertilizer market, but also the herbicide market and probably other inputs too. By our numbers, as last time I looked at them about a week ago, there was still profitability there at these forward contract prices. A lot of risk, that far out, but these forward contract bids for next fall are uniformly over $5 and some at $5.50. And if anything scares people, it's the inflation in the costs. And you hear some K-State economists saying $4.50 break even or $4.60, and these are profitable, but they are wondering if there's an end in sight in natural gas and cost inflation leading to fertilizers moving higher, and just a lot of uncertainty where all this works itself out at. Still, right now, if we don't take the most overcautious view, there's profitability in forward contract bids right now heading out into the fall of 2022.
And a parting thought on soybeans, if we might, Dan. The toehold in the Chinese market that the U.S. has benefited from continues to ebb away, it seems, and part of that has to do with something you brought up earlier, the forthcoming South American crop that's going in good shape right now. Yes,
there are reports that China still has need of these crops from the U.S. and from elsewhere. Reports of some sales just happened the last week, but they've been reticent to come charging into these markets at this time. Soybeans, to no one's surprise, since about June 1st, have been on a pretty strong downtrend, almost a 45-degree line from a high of 14.75 to 12.21 now. 12.21.5 on yesterday's close for January soybeans. One thing I should mention, for soybeans, the November contract, we're beyond the delivery period, but yet here for Kansas City hard red winter wheat and for corn, which would affect grain sorghum, we're coming into a situation where contract delivery period is almost upon us. And I think next week, Eric, as we talk, let's look a little bit closer to that to see how people are positioning themselves on that. And there could be just some technical moves in the market that'll have to take place as people right their positions to get themselves out of risk of delivery. We should try to be on top of that to help people out if we can.
We will pick up on that next week. In the meantime, producers, go to agmanager.info, not only for Dan's notes this week on the grain markets, but for those 2022 crop budgets. Until next Friday, Dan, many thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
K-State Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien here on Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and our aim on this segment of the program is to take a closer look at what may well be the next big stride in grain sorghum genetics out of Kansas State University, and it'll be highlighted at the Governor's Water Conference 2021, set to take place next week. Along with us is Sarah Sexton-Bowser, who is the Managing Director of the Center for Sorghum Improvement here at K-State, as well as an associate scientist in the Department of Agronomy who's working on this. Terry Felderhoff is along as well. Sarah, what we're looking at here is something called the Drop XL grain sorghum technology. Tell us about it and the inspiration behind the work that Terry will fill us in on here in just a bit.
Eric, glad to be on today. As we talk about Drop XL Sorghum, it's really important to go back to the impetus for the project. Kansas Grain Sorghum, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Kansas Water Research Committee within the Kansas Water Office really came together with a funding opportunity to say there is a need for technology for sorghum, and we want to do it in a way that adds to the productivity in grain sorghum as we manage a variety of water opportunity scenarios across our seasons and our production landscapes.
We know sorghum as a water-thrifty crop by its nature, vis-a-vis other crops. So what is the uniqueness of this particular sorghum technology you're exploring?
Well, the uniqueness is twofold. First, using our natural occurring diversity, identifying the specific genetic controls that drive various traits that we're selecting for, and then putting them in compatible plant products that can be used by next users and commercial sorghum breeding programs is an efficient way for us to take the swath of natural diversity that we have in sorghum and produce enabling technology. So that's one really unique feature of this project. The second unique feature is we go to sorghum because it's a drought-resistant hardy crop. Sorghum, rain or shine. We know that feature of sorghum and we treat it as a workhorse on our farms. I certainly do on my farm. And so when we sat down to talk about the various opportunities to improve sorghum, we really wanted to focus in on a way that increased yield opportunity with the least introduction of water stress. And so finding that balance where we maintain that resiliency within the crop, all while trying to maximize the overall profitability and productivity of the crop with whatever water possibility that we're given that particular season.
Let's bring Terry in to dig into this a little deeper. And the angle you're working here in your research, Terry, is to discover a sorghum line that can operate under more limited transpiration.
Yes, that's correct, Eric. I guess what we've done in these few years of research leading up to this point was explore the literature that has been previously conducted to look for this trait in different sorghum lines, some exotic and some of the more traditional U.S. breeding lines. This trait has been looked at in many different crops and also in sorghum. So we had kind of a starting point to go with. And so we looked at different sorghum lines that we then tried to observe this trait in. And we started narrowing down to different sorghum lines that match more of the actual, crop canopy and overall plant architecture of the U.S. grain sorghum archetype. And so, such things as tall height, we would remove plants that, had heights above what is considered agronomically acceptable, as well as trying to limit other traits such as maturity and leaf architecture that could influence this trait so that we could potentially see it in a background as close to what we would expect it to be in a U.S. grain sorghum out in a farmer's field. So that was kind of our first round of narrowing this down. And then we went on to then exploring deeper into sorghum lines that we identified out of that first line and started diving into some of the actual phenotypes of this trait and observing it in the field. And so then as we continued to do this over some more seasons, we then focused in on essentially 3 lines that we've been focusing on and have at this point crossed these lines with each other and developed a mapping population. And this is essentially just a population derived from these materials where we have mixed up the genetics between them in order to more properly identify what genetics are coming from what source and how that is controlling the phenotype of this trait that we see in the field.
Terry, share with the audience today how you actually go about observing in a field how a plant uses water.
We can do this with what's known as a pyrometer, which is a piece of equipment that can help us measure the gas exchange or the transpiration that is happening on the leaves of the plants. This is how the plant is exchanging both oxygen, carbon dioxide, as well as water being transpired through the leaves. And this is a very time-consuming process. You have to go through and do it step by step, and it can take several hours to do even a small number of lines. So then to try to increase our ability to observe this at under a larger population, which is, gives us a stronger ability to observe the genetics that underlie this trait. As we go up to larger fields, multiple acres of a single field observing this trait, we have looked at using thermal imaging to look at the temperature of the canopy and correlate that to the transpiration rate. And since transpiration, like many people understand, evaporation is a cooling process. As humans, as we sweat, that as the water evaporates, it cools us down. Well, the same thing is happening to the plant leaves. As they are losing this water, the leaves are cooling down. And so we are implementing thermal imaging, which uses a drone to fly over our field and image the canopy. And so try to look at differences among different lines within this population that are showing our differences in temperatures of the leaves. And this goes from, something where we can look at 10 or 12 lines, taking us, 2 hours to do those with the pyrometers measuring the gas exchange, to doing this summer we were able to do nearly 300 lines in the span of about 15 minutes with the drone.
Acknowledging once again that you're still very much in the midst of this work and not quite at the end point yet, but is there any notion, ask either of you this, notion of the degree of water use efficiency that can be achieved with these new lines, and along with that, the prospect for yield enhancements?
Eric, I mentioned that to make advancements in sorghum, we had to use really smart approaches. And that includes, before we spend a dime on research in the field, starting to understand if we simulate this trait with Kansas weather data from Kansas sorghum growing regions, what does it mean? Do we need this trait? What's the potential? What are the trade-offs? And we asked those questions at the very upfront before we started this project. If we shift how the sorghum uses water and when it uses water, can we both save water and can we re-emphasize the water available and put it towards yield? And over a 30-year simulation of sorghum growing areas, we found that this trait has potential to increase yield by around 5 bushels to the acre a year in, year out, as well as save water less than an inch, 3/4 of an inch would be the anticipated savings. That's with simulations. That's as we think about what we intuitively know and the mechanisms of that trait, what we would anticipate. And that gave us the onus to put Terry to work and send him back out into the field and say, when we simulate this, it does matter for the type of seasons that we have and the type of environments that we have in Kansas. Terry's still dialing in the phenotyping, that field observation of the plant. So at the point where we'll be able to hand off a trait package here within the decade is the anticipated goal. And that trait package will be readily available to commercial programs that can use it in a rapid way to put it into their sorghum. That way farmers can buy this type of technology in their favorite sorghum background, not just in one.
And those who will be taking part in the Governor's Water Conference virtually next week will hear more directly about all of this, as the two of you will be sharing the latest on Drop XL Sorghum technology at that time. And in the meantime, we wish you both continued success in pursuing this objective, and we thank you for the update on what will be a very big thing for grain sorghum production in Kansas in the not-too-distant future. Appreciate your time, Terry and Sarah.
Thank you.
Along with us, Sarah Sexton-Bowser. She's the managing director of the Center for Sorghum Improvement at K-State, along with associate scientist, Department of Agronomy at the University, Terry Felderhoff. Once more, they are instrumental in this project of developing a grain sorghum line that can use less water while gaining in yields through limited transpiration. We'll be back with more for you on Agriculture Today. Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly glance to the Kansas agricultural weather scene and input once more from meteorologist Chip Redmond of K-State Research and Extension. Well, Chip, we had moisture in half of Kansas, roughly, this past 24 hours or so. Where the rain fell, it was a decent amount, wasn't it?
Yeah, eastern Kansas got a pretty widespread half-inch to localized an inch. And then there was a corridor there from southern Riley County to northeast to Brown County that got 2.5 to 3 inches, depending on where you're at. Unfortunately, though, most of that rain fell really, really hard. So a lot of runoff. It did soak in the ground, thankfully, in places, but a lot of runoff. And then, we think about this long-term soil moisture impacts that will help them. That was an area that really needed moisture. So that should hopefully help alleviate some drought conditions next week.
For our friends in the western part of Kansas, though, there were sprinkles here and there, but largely went wanting once more.
Yeah, unfortunately, some of those places have gone over 30 days to 40 days without a wetting, quarter inch or more of rain, which is not abnormal this time of year out there, but still. And then you factor in a day like today where they're going to have strong winds across most of western Kansas. We'll see some gusts up to 50 miles an hour and some fire weather concerns as well.
And the drought monitor for this week, which records up to this past Tuesday, Has that changed much from the previous monitor?
Not a whole lot of change this week. The rain fell after the cutoff, that Tuesday morning cutoff. We did do some small modifications in far west Kansas, expand the abnormally dry just a little bit, and then also cut it out in an area in north central Kansas that didn't get represented last week. But overall, a fairly cloudy, somewhat average temperature week, as well as low wind. We didn't have much wind over the last 7 days ending on Tuesday, so not a lot of drought change this week.
You mentioned the temperatures. The hard freezes have been rather prominent in far western Kansas. Eastern Kansas is set for its first widespread hard freeze here coming up soon, Chip.
Yeah, we've kept those low temperatures much warmer than normal, and we've expanded the growing season in some places to over 200 days. And in fact, we're expecting cold temperatures to start Saturday morning for the whole state, and we'll clear off. Everyone will get a freeze by Saturday morning, and that will likely be the historic late freeze for several locations, including Manhattan, the latest freeze on record.
And by the looks of that forecast, we're in for a stretch of dry weather for pretty much all of Kansas for the entirety of next week. And for those who want to get back in the fields and continue their last vestiges of harvest or other field work, that may be positive. For those who have gone without moisture, it's just the same refrain, different week, Chip.
Yeah, the temperatures, we'll see below normal temperatures for the next 3 or 4 days. And then after that, next week will warm up again. The good news is that freeze should help some folks. I know there were some folks in north central Kansas with sorghum that they were waiting to harvest because it just wasn't drying out because they hadn't had that freeze. So hopefully they'll be able to harvest that. And then precipitation-wise, yeah, we're not going to have much moisture through the upcoming week. And really, even the outlooks for the next 2 to 3 weeks are below normal precipitation. So a drying trend for the whole state, as well as warming as we get past this weekend.
When we visit next Friday, we will get into detail about the holiday traveling forecast, as folks will be thinking Thanksgiving here not too long from now. In the meantime, Chip, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Yep, you too.
He is Chip Redmond, meteorologist, K-State Research and Extension, over at the Weather Data Library here at the university. And with that, our time is away once more. Thanks for tuning in, and please be back with us right here this same time on Monday, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.